I have read a lot of books this year. We're at 101, roughly. And I know that's like been the topic of controversy over on Book Talk and like everywhere and whatever. And let me just say, I don't care. If you read 100 books in a year, if you read one book in a year, if you read 400 books, I don't care. It's not my business. However, I will say that a lot of the books that are in that category for me, that 101, have been like less than 300 page, cute, fast paced little books on my Kindle. And they just don't take that long to read. Plus, I have pulled many an all nighter. So, with all that being said, though, there has been at least one book every month that has stood out amongst all of the rest. It like stopped me in my tracks, it made me question the world, more than likely made me question myself, and it impacted me in ways that's like very, difficult to express sometimes. And those books are what we'll be discussing today. Hey, I'm Marilyn, and this is my Bookish Groove. And these are my favorite reads from each month of 2025. At the beginning of the year, I did make a little book tracking journal, and I unfortunately did not keep up with it as much as I wanted to. By that, I just mean I didn't really keep up with the spreads that I wanted to do afterwards, but I did have some that were just like about filling it in. So, one of the spreads that I did was a reading book bracket. It is one of my favorite spreads in the whole journal. Hi, some love for the book bracket. And this I have kept up with a little bit, meaning I recently just updated it. So, anyway, that is what we'll be going off of. And there's just one change that I made, so no worries. But let's go ahead and get started off really strong in January. Starting in January, we have Onyx Storm by Rebecca Yarros. So this did come out in January. And if you don't know, this is part of the Empyrean series. It's like more commonly referred to as just Fourth Wing in general. And Fourth Wing follows this young girl who, against her wishes, has to join the kind of dragon riding quadrant in this war college that she has to attend. But her whole life, she's been training to be a scribe. So, like the bookkeepers and the writers and the history keepers and the et cetera, et cetera. However, with her mom being the like general, she ends up having to join this quadrant, and not only that, but the son of her mom's arch like rival whom she killed is there, and he's maybe got it out for her. But a very prominent theme in the Empyrean series is that sometimes the things that your government tells you are not always the truth. So that is what the Empyrean series is more or less about, and Onyx Storm is the third installment of that series. For me, it is my favorite of the three, and I will say, like, in a series that becomes my favorite, usually the first one is like, it's a holy grail, it is a thing on its own, it can't really be compared, and then anything after that is completely separate. So this might be like my favorite in the series, but Fourth Wing is still the best. Does that make sense? Maybe not. Maybe not. But it makes sense to me, and that's how I'm going to go with it. But Onyx Storm is my favorite. I loved the world building. I loved everything that we got to experience and all the travel that we got to do in this book. And I won't say much more about it because I don't want to spoil it for anybody. But if you are interested in getting into the Fourth Wing series, I personally highly recommend it. And it is what got me back into reading as an adult. I read very sporadically before that. And then I started Fourth Wing, and I literally have not looked back since. Also, Onyx Storm was just a special experience for me because I did go to the midnight release party with my best friend who got me into the series, so we just had a really, really good time all around with this book. Then moving on to February, I tried to challenge myself in February to read a lot of rom-coms and contemporary romance because I've said it before on this channel, but it's not my preferred genre of reading. And I had a couple that I just needed to read, and I said, you know what, let me give myself a challenge and just get those off my shelves. And I did, and a lot of them are off my shelves. However, that very same month, thanks to that challenge, I read a book that would introduce me to what would become my favorite author ever, and also one of my favorite books of all time, and that is The 7-Year Slip by Ashley Poston. This book is kind of hard to explain genre-wise because I would not consider this to be a rom-com. I would consider this to be just magical realism romance fiction, and I say that because I really consider this to be more fiction and more like literary fiction than I do consider it to be anything really else. Obviously like romance, so that's why I'd say romance fiction. And this story follows our girl Clementine. I love my girl Clementine. She is grieving her aunt, who she was really, really close with. It seems that her aunt was like the only person that ever really, truly understood her. And she just loved her aunt. She was this free spirit, this person that just kind of did whatever they wanted, went by the beat of their own drum, flew by the seat of their own pants, whatever the case may be. I don't know all the things now. Anyway. So she inherits this apartment that her aunt lived in for many years and quickly realizes that the stories that her aunt used to tell her about this magical apartment actually turned out to be true, because there's a man just sitting there in her kitchen and he's like, "Oh yeah, your aunt let me sublet this place." And she's like, I don't think she did actually. I don't think she actually did that though. So, and it turns out he is actually 7 years in the past. And for some reason in this apartment, their two timelines intersect, but it is literally just in this apartment. So he's 7 years in the past, she's 7 years in his future. And so then begins a beautiful story of grief, but also growth and humanity and learning and love, and this idea that you are not the same person that you were 5 years ago. You're not the same person that you were yesterday. You know, there are tiny little things that happen to us every day, and micro decisions that we make or are made for us that completely can change the trajectory of our lives. And it's important to not get stuck holding on to a version of ourselves that there's no possible way you could still be, and allowing yourself to be these new versions of yourself and to grow and to accept and to evolve as these new versions that we become every single day. Like, it's okay to let go of the things that you once thought you would want at this point and embrace the things that you now want or you now need, you know, as we learn and grow. So this book just has everything. It's just a beautiful story and I love it. And it is one of my favorite books of all time and I highly recommend it. Then in March, I wanted to focus on women and Women's Month. It's Women's Month, obviously. So what I wanted to do was just kind of have this whole TBR just stacked full of women's stories and women authors and all, you know, yeah. And then I read a book that was so fucking good that it completely
destroyed my brain for the rest of the month.
And that's this one right here. The Women by Kristen Hanna physically harmed me. So, Kristen Hanna, your lawyers, my lawyers, whatever we got to do. Physically, this harmed me quite a bit, okay? This was an absolutely fantastic, beautiful book. Shut up! The Women is about Frankie McGrath, and she enlists in the Army Nurse Corps with the motto that women can be heroes too. She has this desire to prove not only to the world and to her father, but mostly to herself, that she can make a difference. She can really be a change for people, and that men are not the only ones that can help. So she goes into this bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, as one would say, and quickly realizes that the picture the US government has been painting of the Vietnam War is not true or accurate to the realities that these soldiers and the nurses are facing on the ground, on the front lines. Now, look, unless you're a history buff and you just know everything about the Vietnam War, if you read this book and you go into it without any of this, like, you know, knowledge of a history buff and all that, then you go into this just as green as Frankie McGrath is going into the battlefield. And I think for me, that is why this book hit so unbelievably hard. Not knowing anything, or at least not knowing the details, enhanced my reading experience quite a bit. While reading this, I felt like I was there getting, you know, bombed and holding the hands of these young boys who just wanted to serve their country, and feeling every feeling that Frankie McGrath feels, and feeling this kind of like fish out of water experience of being a young girl who just wanted to make a difference, and you got in way over your head, but you're gonna do it anyway because you are capable and women can be heroes. But it is this frustration that you were led astray and lied to. Obviously, throughout this book, you follow many years of Frankie McGrath's life and just so much more that comes after. This book truly embedded itself into my heart and soul like literally no other book has before this. and it is probably one of the first books that I've cried like close to 10 times, and I'm not like, no, I'm talking like it's just, it was an experience, and I do think more people should read about it because I learned so much about the Vietnam War that I never learned before, never would have even thought about. And so much specifically about the women that fought, the women that were there, and just the way that the world was afterwards. And it just helps to put a lot of things into perspective. So again, I really, really enjoyed this book. It did put me in a slump for a month. So be aware. Be aware. Okay, so by the time that we got to April and I finally made it out of my book slump, then I read Circe by Madeline Miller. Yeah, I know. You're like, oh my God, girl, that's a 1-2 punch. And you were right. It is. And it was. And it still is. If you've heard the name Madeline Miller before, though, that's probably because you've heard of Song of Achilles. It's like the one of the most talked about books on Book Talk, and I did read that one as well. It was very good. However, Circe, to me,
that's my baby. She's iconic.
Circe is one that I don't hear talked about nearly enough, and I think we should. So allow me to introduce you. Circe is a retelling of the Greek story of Circe, and she is a witch. Specifically, she was exiled to this island after it was kind of discovered, or she revealed that she had this magic, these abilities, right? She was a witch. But specifically, she actually used those to turn this sea nymph into this snake-like beast that eats men. Obviously threatened by her power, Zeus exiles her to this island. I think his punishment was going to be far worse, and then her dad was like, no, let's just exile her. But her dad's also... Anyway, read the book. Hey. This then follows centuries of Circe's life on this island and just kind of what she has done with this time, with her being in her existence. But it's so much more than that. I think everybody should read this book, but I specifically think like women in general should just read this book because it is a story for us, and it is about that female rage a little bit, and just the female experience in general. You have, from girlhood and just the innocence of girlhood and the curiosity of being a kid. And then you have your first love and petty arguments and, these feelings and experiences that reading Circe is almost like what you kind of envisioned in your head when you were going through these periods in your life of like, God, I wish I could turn that girl into a this and this for talking to my boyfriend or whatever, like those things. It's very, very just innate to human nature. And it's like petty stuff, but it's told through this very serious mythological lens. But then you go into, adulthood and themes of motherhood and loss and just so many things. I mean, it's truly just everything. And I think it is a perfect book. I loved it so much. For me, the tagline that I use when I try to sell this book to somebody is just to never let the limitations that society or the world might try to set on you keep you from your potential, keep you from what you're meant to do and who you're meant to be. And that is really the epitome of this book, Circe. And we're just keeping it going in May. So this is I Who Have Never Known Men by Jacqueline Harpman. And this book is about these 40 women that are trapped in this like cage bunker underground, and they have absolutely no access to the outside world, not even a window, nothing. They have no idea what time it is, where they are, how long they've been there, but really their only measure of time is the youngest of the women among them, who is this young toddler when they get there, and they can kind of track time based on the fact that the girl does grow up a little bit, right? However, in this bunker, they have no privacy, they have no ability to touch or to gather quietly, and it's basically just this huge cage with cots all lined up in a row, and that's it. They are monitored 24/7 by these masked guards, and it is alluded to that there is this other thing that is also keeping an eye on them, even when it's very dark, because if they were to step out of line, if they were to break a rule, there's this shock that would come in and just like shock them, right? So you're following the perspective of the youngest one, the one who has no clue, notion, memory, remembrance at all of any life outside of this prison. One day, something goes awry, and they are presented with this great opportunity for escape. But this book is, in my opinion, truly the epitome of asking the question, what is innate and what is not? What is learned as far as human nature goes? It is nature versus nurture if nurture was impossible. Our main character, and the one that we're following, has no conception of modesty or manners or, polite society or anything like that. I mean, that doesn't mean anything to her. She doesn't grow up with these same things that we grow up with, right? And the same things that make us have a culture or customs or, things that we do because it's what we've learned and observed. She only knows being inside of a cage with 39 other women that she can't even touch, and some masked people that she has no idea like who they are, what they're about, nothing. So it's really interesting being in her mind and seeing what parts of human nature really do prevail, what parts are just part of you. But more than that, who do you become when no one's watching? When there are no consequences, when nothing could happen, really? Who do you become? And on a broader scale, what are certain things worth when the outcome is all the same? Like we all meet the same fate in the end, So it asks a lot of those kinds of questions. And then I do think learning about the author after reading this and learning about the author's history, it makes a lot of things make sense. And it honestly puts into perspective certain parts of this that I think people might find confusing. I would like to read this book again, knowing what I know now about this author. And I would recommend, if you are going to read this, I would still recommend going into it blind and then reading what, like who the author is and the author's story. Because while there is something to be said about like just reading it before, I think kind of letting yourself come up with your own ideas as to why this and this happens or what this might mean or et cetera, and then learning that there might very well have been an intentional reason why this was done this way based on what you learned about the author. I think that's a better experience rather than just knowing everything, and then just plugging it in as you go. This is one of those books that I think is rereadable, and I think it should be reread. So that's why I think it'd just be better to do it that way. It's my recommendation. But anyway, there we go. And now I'm going into June, my beloved. My birthday's in June, so But in June, I read Barrier Bones and Midnight Soil. And it was so good. It was so good. All right, so this book follows 3 different timelines that eventually interconnect and intersect, but it starts all the way back in the 1500s and then it goes to present day. The tagline for this story was toxic lesbian vampires, and I do agree, and I do love that tagline. However, I do want to expand a bit upon that. So this obviously begins with a young girl in the 1500s, and she hates society. She's very like forward thinking, and she doesn't like all these limitations that are already being set on her. She yearns for more, and it causes her to end up making this kind of deal with the devil sort of thing, but it's a deal with a vampire, and then she becomes one. And thus begins a very, very, very bloody next couple of 100 years. However, there's more to this book than just that. Okay, so something that I want to emphasize, because there's been some critiques about the book as far as like, it maybe not delivering what it was supposed to, or the ending or whatever. And I disagree wholeheartedly. Like, I loved this book so much. And here's why. Okay. So sure, you're following 3 vampires, different time periods. You're following like this kind of toxic love story. There's all of this stuff going on, right? But at the crux of things, remember that you're starting in the 1500s and it goes to present day. And despite that, this time period, civilizations rise and fall, empires topple, technology soars, entire industries are created, the world physically changes. And yet, despite that, the treatment of women has largely stayed the same in many different ways. It may look different now, but it's very similar. And you get that instantly in our present day timeline. You get that instantly. And it's almost like a very subtle thing that is included that while you're following the women and like all of this stuff that's happening, it's like very easy maybe to miss that little detail, but it's very clear that they're showing you, hey, we're in three completely different timelines, literally separated by several hundred years, and men are acting very similarly as they were in the 1500s and they are today. So for me, this is where that female rage aspect comes in, not just from the female rage that the characters are feeling for themselves and their situations, but you as the reader feel so much anger at seeing this and at realizing that you are in this present timeline and this is reality. But not only that, you're seeing all the decisions that they make and all of the different things that they have to contend with and their individual lives and experiences and priorities that weigh on why they do what they do. Okay, so I actually wrote something down to kind of like better explain what I'm trying to say as far as like these characters and the way that this is about female rage in an even more like visceral capacity than what you kind of see at the surface level. You see the reason for their actions, their descent into who they inevitably become when a lack of choice turns into desperation, and desperation turns into survival. And then, after all that, you forget what you're even surviving for. Like, this book is so much more than just vampires and sapphic longing. It's truly a commentary on control and the female experience throughout history and even to this day. So I loved this book, personally. I thought it was fantastic. And I think that the certain critiques about the end, specifically with one character, I don't agree with because I thought that the ending was actually perfect. And if you think about what I just said, I feel like that maybe will help you understand why I see it that way, because that's the exact reason that I see it as a good ending and not as an anticlimactic ending. All right, so then going into July, we have How Freaking Romantic. So I, again, am not usually a contemporary rom-com reader. However, this book, I don't know. I can't even explain it to you if I tried. I don't know what this book did differently that made me adore it, but it did. There was something about this book, something about the way that it was written or the plotting or the story structure, I don't know, but it was just so much better than some of these other ones that I've read that are so popular, and I just don't understand how. But like, this book was fantastic. It was funny, it was witty, it was I'm getting ahead of myself. What is this about? This is a story about a law student who is like perpetually angry, and this lawyer who ends up having to step in to be the like adjunct professor of the law class that she's a TA for. But it's complicated because he is actually representing one of her best friends, kind of ex-best friend, in the divorce case against her other best friend, who she's still like very, very close with. And it's a very messy situation. And so she has kind of taken it upon herself to hate this lawyer on behalf of her other best friend. And you know, because it's just like a messy situation, it's kind of ruining that girl's life and all this stuff. So she's just like, I hate you. And he's very much Nick Miller in that scene in New Girl where the lady is speaking in a foreign language, but she's yelling at him. And he's like,
stop being so mean to me or I swear to God I'm gonna fall in love with you. Where you going? Come back.
so that's our lawyer guy. That's our man's. That's our man right there. He's just like, wow, she's yelling at me. She's so pretty when she yells. Like, I don't know. That's how I saw him. I saw him immediately down bad for this girl, and I just loved it. I ate it up with a spoon. You just kind of go through this, like, kind of will they, won't they, like, complicated-ish relationship situation. Well, they're not really in a relationship, but, like, you know, there's this kind of, like, chemistry, this longing, this little situation. So it's just like so good. It's so good. It's so good. It is, I don't know, it's just such a cozy, warm feeling read to me. And I just thought it was so good. I thought it was so funny. Like, I was laughing so much while I was reading this. But also I just felt so endeared to the characters and the romance, and everything just felt so earned in this. Nothing felt excessive. It was perfect. It was literally the perfect little romance book, and I loved it, and I recommend it, and I think you should read it. Then in August, I finally let myself read another Ashley Poston book. Now, I am collecting and hoarding these books like a dragon hoards that's like gold coins or something, okay? Like, I love her writing style, and I love the way that she tells stories and the types of stories that she tells. So the fact that there's not that many of her books out does stress me out. And so I was like, well, I have to make these last as long as physically and feasibly possible. So I spread them out quite a bit. So then I read A Novel Love Story, and of course, I loved that. I loved that. I wasn't shocked by that at all. So in this one, you are following Eileen, and she is truly having the worst time of her life. She all but got left at the altar. She's not having a great time at work. Her best friends have all just canceled on this retreat that they do every year. But on top of that, her favorite author had passed away, and passed away before she could finish her beloved romance series, which also happens to be Eileen's favorite book series of all time. A couple of facts that she's heartbroken and feeling abandoned, but now she doesn't even have her favorite book series to kind of pull her through this time. She decides to end up just going on this retreat by herself, and of course a storm happens and her car breaks down and she gets like caught up in this small little town. And the longer she's there, the more she's realizing, hey, this place looks and sounds, and the people that live here look and sound a whole lot like the characters and setting of that book series I really like. Huh. All except for the brooding bookstore owner, who seems to pick up what she's picking up, but he's not that interested in investigating further. And it's the cutest thing ever. And what book lover doesn't dream of literally transporting to their favorite book world and interacting with their favorite book characters? Come on. So yeah, it was just a fun read. It was good. Now we're getting into the heavy hitter. A real heavy hitter. The September book that I read was This Is How You Lose a Time War. Oh. This book... it's so good. It's so good. Look at it, so tiny. It's so good. I recommend. Okay, so this is a sci-fi book, and it follows two operatives on opposing sides of this seemingly, literally, never-ending time war. They're both the best at what they do, and they essentially, like, the two sides, like, chase each other through time. They're trying to undo what the other side is doing. But what begins between these two, Red and Blue, as a kind of, like, bantering correspondence turns into sending each other love letters throughout time and history. And it's the sweetest thing. I mean, it's literally like sending a letter in the lava that's, you know, destroying Atlantis as Atlantis sinks into the sea, or it's a letter that is kind of carved into the rings of a 1,000-year-old tree. And, you know, it's this letter that's been left over the course of centuries. And so all these creative letters and ways of sending these letters for each other that they can each find. It just becomes these love letters through time, and it is absolutely beautiful. And there's so many beautiful Easter eggs in here that reference things from our timeline, and, you know, it's almost like a love letter to written art forms. And it's wrapped up, all of it, in this beautiful, one of the most beautiful love stories I've ever read in my life. This is a top contender for favorite book of the entire year. Okay, and now we're going to go into October, and I'll just tell you, in October, I read another Ashley Poston book, so I'll give you a second to act utterly shocked when I show you The Dead Romantics by Ashley Poston. Was my favorite book of October. Thank you. Thank you. I have range. Ashley Poston is my favorite author. What can I say? So The Dead Romantics follows Florence, and she is a ghostwriter for this very famous, prolific author. However, unfortunately, after a very bad breakup, she struggles to believe in love again, but even more so, she struggles to write about love, and that's a problem because, well, she writes love stories for this lady. So, you know, presents an issue. She has this new editor, and he's like breathing down her neck despite her wanting him to breathe down her neck for a different reason. What? Who said that? It's safe to say she's like super stressed, and she's just like not having a great time. The cherry on top is that her father, unfortunately, unexpectedly passes away. And so for the first time in 10 years, she has to go back to her hometown, back to her family's funeral home that they own, and kind of confront all of these demons of her past, all of these regrets that she has, all of these mistakes that she has to kind of own up to. Wait, because if that was enough, hey, Florence can actually see ghosts. Something her and her dad shared. That's something that she's tried to leave in her past. She did not want to bring that with her in her new life. And she has tried very hard to leave that in her past. However, it becomes pretty difficult when the ghost that shows up on your doorstep just so happens to be that editor that you thought you left back in New York City. Hey, what the fuck? But for sure, this was like the darkest of the Ashley Poston books, I think, so far. I feel like just like as far as setting and just like theme, you know, her other ones touch on grief, but this one is like an entire book surrounding a funeral and ghosts and graveyards and death. So it is definitely like the darkest of them. It still manages to have lighthearted moments and really beautiful emotional payoffs and just like things that truly touch your soul. It's a healing journey, and it's really touching on the fact that you should never let like fears or what other people might think of you force you into this box that will just barricade you from your life and from experiences that you might have, and force you to end up with so many regrets and no way of really reconciling that. This book is also definitely for the eldest daughters, okay, and especially for the girlies that love a sweet, smart man wearing slutty little glasses. One of my favorite book boyfriends of all time. For November, we have another Kristen Hanna. So as we can see, we've had some hard hitters here, okay? There's some authors that have been really pulling their weight in this list so far. This is a story that takes place during World War II, specifically the Nazi invasion of Paris and just France in general. And you're following the stories of two sisters, and they're kind of in different areas, and just like the stories of how each of them survives this time period and the decisions that they each have to make for their survival. The priorities that each has that the other one might not have. Where you are in your life and what you have determines like what you can give and who you can be, but also you're capable of so much more than you're even realizing that you are capable of. So not only was this like super well researched, like I'm sure most of her books are, because I know The Women was very well researched, but it was just so real. It shows the grit of women and in all of the ways that women have fought, and but not just women in general. Like, I mean, obviously her stories do focus more on women and women struggles and all that stuff, but in this time period, so many people did insane, amazing things, and a lot of their names are going to be forgotten by the history books and the records, but they still did it. They did it despite the fact that they could get tortured, despite the fact that they would die, despite the fact of anything. They decided that helping others was worth it. They said, you know what, if this is what comes out of it, then okay, but like this is something that's not okay, and we're going to do something about it. And you see the ways that both of these sisters did that in their own ways. So while The Women still remains my favorite Kristen Hanna book, this was still such a huge hard hitter. And it goes with what I don't know if I actually mentioned that now, I can't remember, but oh yeah, I did. So in The Women, I said you should definitely go into that one, like, you know, if you don't know anything about the Vietnam War, you go into it green and it just like hits you a lot harder. So I think the reason this one didn't hit me harder than The Women, despite the fact that so many people said that this one was the better of the two books, was because I've known so much about World War II. I consume a lot of media about it. So I knew a lot about World War II. And while the atrocities and the evilness of it can never really just be something you become used to, it's something I knew more about. I didn't know anything about the Vietnam War. So for me, that one just hit a lot harder because I couldn't believe it. I was learning as I was reading. With this one, I was also learning while I was reading, but a lot of it, I was like, oh, that is something that happened. Like, wow, that's so sad, like da-da-da, whatever. So I think that's the difference with why The Women for me was better, but they're both absolutely fantastic, and I cannot wait to see the movie adaptations to both of these books, so highly recommend. Okay, well that's it so far. I recommend checking out my December TBR video so you can see a list of the books that are contenders for my favorite book of December.
Jingle bells, jingle bells, jingle.
Hey, this is Future Marilyn here. I'm just hopping in because it took me so long to edit this video that it is now December 31st, and I can just tell you what my favorite book of December was. So if you haven't seen my TBR vlog for December, then I would go watch that. But basically, I only ended up finishing 3 books from my TBR, and then I read another book on my Kindle. And the 3 books that I finished from my TBR was The Gingerbread Bakery, A Pack for Winter and Queen of Shadows. I did start like 3 of the other ones on my TBR, but I just haven't finished them. And I can go ahead and say that from these 3, even though I enjoyed every single one of them, loved them, and this is my new favorite from the Lori Gilmore series, or I guess the Dream Harbor series, and I did love A Pack for Winter, Queen of Shadows is going to be my pick for best book of December from my TBR. With that being said, now that I have all of the books, I can go ahead and say which book was my all-time favorite for the year. And this is a hard decision, okay? Because it's between 2. Mercy and This Is How You Lose the Time War. And it is, like, I can't even explain to you how much those both mean to me. But I think that the book that I'm going to crown my best favorite book of 2025 is going to be Circe by Madeline Miller. That one had the most impact on me, and I just think that it's one that I would just, I don't know, I just felt so connected to it, and I loved it so much. And that's the same for Time War, but Circe is just something that I feel like I can take with me. It's a kind of a roadmap of life and of girlhood and of being a woman, and I just loved it so much. So Circe is my favorite book of the year. Well, that's it for this little insert, and I will get back to Past Marilyn to close us out. And please let me know if you've read any of these, what your thoughts on them were, if you liked what I said about them. You know, let's have a little discussion. Please check out my Instagram, so that's going to be linked down below, as well as all of my other platforms. That is where I post like short form content. Yeah, so please check all that stuff out and let me know if there's anything else that you'd like to see. But that's it for now. Thank you so much for watching, and most importantly of all, stay groovy. Bye!